Sarah was a seasoned flight attendant who had spent over a decade working in the airline industry. She prided herself on her professionalism and ability to handle any situation that might arise during a flight. Whether it was calming nervous passengers, dealing with unruly travelers, or ensuring everyone followed safety protocols, Sarah always did her job with grace and efficiency. To her, flying wasn't just a job, it was a lifestyle. Every day brought new challenges, but she enjoyed the routine and structure of her work. On this particular morning, Sarah arrived at the airport early, as usual. She greeted her colleagues with a warm smile before heading to the gate to prepare for the day's flight. It was a domestic route, traveling from New York City to Los Angeles, a journey she had done countless times before. Passengers began boarding shortly after, dragging their suitcases, chatting excitedly, or scrolling through their phones. Everything seemed normal. As Sarah walked up and down the aisle helping people find their seats and stow their luggage, she felt confident that this would be another uneventful trip. The plane took off smoothly, climbing higher into the sky until it reached its cruising altitude. Once the seatbelt sign turned off, Sarah got busy serving drinks and snacks to the passengers. Some asked for coffee, others for water, and a few requested soft drinks. She moved efficiently, making small talk with those who wanted to chat and respecting the silence of those who preferred to rest. It was all part of the routine she loved so much. But midway through the flight, something caught Sarah's attention. Near the back of the cabin, a young black teenager sat alone in his seat. He looked about 16 or 17 years old, wearing a hoodie and jeans. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about him. He blended in with the other passengers. But Sarah noticed he kept glancing around nervously, looking out the window one moment and then turning to scan the rows of passengers behind him. Occasionally, he whispered into his phone, though Sarah couldn't hear what he was saying. To most people, these actions might not have meant anything significant. After all, flights could make anyone feel anxious, especially younger travelers. But to Sarah, something about the boy's behavior didn't sit right. Her instincts told her to pay closer attention. Over the years, she had seen news reports about security threats on planes, stories of suspicious individuals whose seemingly harmless actions turned out to be dangerous. These incidents were rare, but they stuck in her mind like cautionary tales. As Sarah continued serving refreshments, she found herself stealing glances at the boy. His nervous energy stood out in contrast to the relaxed demeanor of the other passengers. Most of them were either sleeping, reading, or watching movies on their devices. Why was this teenager acting so differently? Was he simply uneasy about flying, or was there more to it? Her curiosity grew when the boy pulled out a small notebook from his backpack. He flipped open the cover and started jotting something down. From where Sarah stood, she couldn't see what he was writing, but the act itself raised red flags in her mind. In today's world, taking notes on a plane could easily be misinterpreted as suspicious behavior. What if he was planning something? What if he posed a threat to the safety of everyone on board? Sarah tried to shake off her worries, telling herself she might be overthinking things. Maybe the boy was just keeping track of homework assignments, or writing lyrics for a song. But the nagging voice in her head wouldn't quiet down. She had a responsibility to ensure the safety of her passengers, and ignoring her gut feeling felt wrong. Still, she hesitated. Reporting someone based on mere suspicion could lead to unnecessary panic, or worse, an embarrassing misunderstanding. After debating internally for several minutes, Sarah decided to err on the side of caution. She discreetly approached the captain's cabin and informed him of her concerns. "There's a young man near the back," she explained quietly. "He's been acting strangely, looking around a lot, whispering into his phone, and now he's writing something in a notebook. I don't know if it's anything serious, but I thought you should know." The captain listened carefully, nodding as Sarah spoke. He understood the importance of addressing potential threats, no matter how minor they seemed. Without alarming the passengers, he contacted ground control to alert them of the situation. By the time the plane began its descent toward Los Angeles, law enforcement officers were already waiting at the gate, prepared to question the teenager once the aircraft landed. Throughout the remainder of the flight, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. On one hand, she believed she had done the right thing by reporting her suspicions. Safety came first, and she couldn't afford to take chances. On the other hand, doubt gnawed at her. Had she jumped to conclusions too quickly? Could she have handled the situation differently? As the plane descended, Sarah glanced toward the back of the cabin again. The boy was still sitting in his seat, oblivious to the drama unfolding around him. He seemed completely focused on whatever he was doing, unaware that his actions had drawn scrutiny. Sarah felt a pang of guilt but pushed it aside. Whatever happened next was out of her hands. All she could do now was wait and hope she hadn't made a grave mistake. Little did Sarah know. The events that would unfold after landing would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone involved. What started as a routine flight was about to become anything but ordinary, and as the wheels of the plane touched down on the runway, Sarah braced herself for what lay ahead. The plane landed smoothly on the runway, and the familiar hum of engines slowed to a gentle whir. Passengers unbuckled their seatbelts, stretched their legs, and began gathering their belongings in preparation to disembark. Most were eager to step off the aircraft after the long flight, some heading to connecting flights, others reuniting with loved ones or rushing to business meetings. The usual post-flight chatter filled the cabin as people lined up in the aisles, waiting for their turn to exit. Amidst this normalcy, Sarah stood near the front of the plane, her hands clasped tightly together. She tried to appear calm and professional, greeting passengers with polite smiles as they passed by. But inside, her heart was racing. Her mind kept replaying the conversation she'd had with the captain earlier. Had she overreacted? Was the boy really a threat? Or was she letting fear cloud her judgment? As the line of passengers moved forward, Sarah noticed the teenager, the same boy who had caught her attention during the flight, lingering near the back of the cabin. He looked hesitant, glancing around as if unsure what to do next. Unlike many of the other travelers, he wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, he sat quietly in his seat, scrolling through his phone while occasionally looking up toward the front of the plane. His behavior seemed innocent enough, but Sarah couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. When it was finally his turn to exit, the boy stood up slowly, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. He walked down the aisle with a calm demeanor, seemingly unaware of the tension building outside. As he stepped off the plane, 2 police officers approached him almost immediately. Their uniforms and stern expressions drew the attention of nearby passengers, who paused mid-step to watch the unfolding scene. "Excuse me, son," one of the officers said firmly, stepping into the boy's path. "We need you to come with us." The boy froze, confusion written all over his face. "What? Why?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Did I do something wrong?" The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured for the boy to follow them, leading him away from the crowd and toward a quieter area of the terminal. The boy complied reluctantly, casting nervous glances at the growing number of curious onlookers. His hands gripped the straps of his backpack tightly, betraying his anxiety. Though he didn't resist, it was clear he was scared, and rightfully so. Being singled out by law enforcement is intimidating for anyone, let alone a teenager. Sarah watched the entire exchange. From a distance, her stomach churning. She had expected some kind of response from authorities, but seeing the boy being escorted away made her feel uneasy. Was this really necessary? Could she have handled the situation differently? These questions swirled in her mind as she struggled to reconcile her actions with the reality playing out before her eyes. Meanwhile, the rest of the passengers continued on their way, most shrugging off the incident as none of their business. A few whispered among themselves, speculating about what might have happened. "Do you think he did something bad?" one woman murmured to her companion. Another man shook his head dismissively. "Probably just a misunderstanding," he replied. No one stayed long enough to find out more, except for one person. Standing near the gate, a tall, sharply dressed woman observed everything with quiet intensity. She wore a sleek navy blue blazer paired with tailored trousers, exuding an air of authority that commanded respect. Her presence was striking, even though she hadn't said a word yet. Clutching a leather briefcase in one hand, she watched as the boy disappeared into the private questioning area with the officers. There was something deliberate about the way she stood there, her expression unreadable but clearly focused. Sarah noticed the woman from the corner of her eye but didn't think much of it at first. With so many people milling about, it was easy to overlook someone standing silently in the background. But as time went on, the woman remained in place, her gaze fixed on the spot where the boy had been taken. Something about her demeanor suggested she wasn't just another curious bystander. Who was she, and why did she seem so interested in what was happening? Curiosity got the better of Sarah, and she decided to approach the woman cautiously. "Excuse me," she said softly, trying not to startle her. "Is there something I can help you with?" The woman turned to face Sarah, her piercing eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, Sarah felt like she was being scrutinized under a microscope. Then, without missing a beat, the woman responded in a calm but authoritative tone. "I'm here because of my son," she said simply. Sarah blinked in surprise. "Your son?" she repeated, her voice faltering. "Yes," the woman confirmed, her jaw tightening ever so slightly. "That boy who was just taken away, he's my son. And I want to know exactly why he's being detained." Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Suddenly, the weight of her earlier decision came crashing down on her. This wasn't just some random teenager, this was someone's child. And judging by the confidence and poise of the woman standing in front of her, she wasn't someone to be trifled with. Before Sarah could respond, the woman introduced herself. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Johnson," she said, extending her hand. "I'm the chief of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. "The FBI chief?" She stared at the woman in stunned silence, unable to process what she was hearing. Of all the possible outcomes, this was the last thing she had anticipated. How could the teenage boy, a supposed suspicious passenger, be the son of such a high-ranking government official? Dr. Johnson wasted no time getting to the bottom of things. Without waiting for an invitation, she strode purposefully toward the security checkpoint where Marcus, as Sarah now knew the boy was named, was being questioned. Sarah followed closely behind, feeling smaller with each step. When they reached the room, Dr. Johnson knocked firmly on the door before entering without hesitation. Inside, Marcus sat at a small table, flanked by two officers who were asking him questions. His face lit up when he saw his mother walk in, relief washing over him. "Mom?" he exclaimed, standing up quickly. "It's okay, Marcus," Dr. Johnson reassured him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Turning to the officers, she demanded answers. "What evidence do you have against my son? Why is he being detained?" The officers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unprepared for this unexpected development. One of them cleared his throat nervously before responding. "Ma'am, we received a report from the flight crew regarding suspicious behavior. We're just trying to clarify the situation." Dr. Johnson raised an eyebrow, her tone sharp but controlled. "Suspicious behavior? Care to elaborate, Atikior?" That moment, all eyes turned to Sarah, who suddenly found herself in the spotlight. She swallowed hard, feeling the full weight of the situation bearing down on her. All she could do was explain herself, and hope that her words would somehow make sense. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Sarah. She felt like a spotlight had been trained directly on her, exposing every insecurity and doubt she'd been trying to suppress. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Standing in front of Dr. Evelyn Johnson, the formidable FBI chief, was intimidating enough, but knowing that this powerful woman was also the mother of the teenager she had reported made it feel almost unbearable. I'm Sarah," she stammered, clutching her hands together nervously. "I'm one of the flight attendants from the plane." Her voice wavered, and she struggled to maintain eye contact with Dr. Johnson, who stood tall and composed, exuding an aura of authority that left no room for excuses. Dr. Johnson nodded curtly, signaling for Sarah to continue. "Go on," she said, her tone calm but firm. "Explain what happened." Sarah took a deep breath, forcing herself to speak clearly despite the knot in her stomach. "During the flight, I noticed your son. He was sitting near the back of the cabin, and he seemed restless. He kept looking around, whispering into his phone, and then he pulled out a notebook and started writing something down. It just seemed unusual to me, so I thought it would be best to alert the captain. As soon as the words left her mouth, Sarah regretted how they sounded. They came across as vague and hollow even to her own ears. She could see the skepticism in Dr. Johnson's eyes, which only deepened her sense of shame. What had seemed like a cautious decision during the flight now felt reckless and poorly thought out. Dr. Johnson crossed her arms over her chest, studying Sarah with a piercing gaze. "Unusual," she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Can you elaborate? Exactly what about my son's behavior struck you as suspicious?" Sarah hesitated, searching for the right words. "Well, ma'am, it's just... people don't usually write things down on planes unless they're doing work or school assignments." And he looked nervous, like he was trying not to draw attention to himself. "With everything going on in the world these days, I didn't want to take any chances." For a moment, there was silence. The two officers standing nearby shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension in the air. Marcus, still seated at the table, watched quietly, his expression a mix of relief and frustration. He knew his mom wouldn't let anyone mistreat him, but the situation was humiliating nonetheless. Dr. Johnson sighed deeply, shaking her head. "Let me ask you this," she said, leaning forward slightly. "If my son had been white, would you have reacted the same way? Or is it possible that your perception of him was influenced by biases you may not even realize you hold?" The question hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Deep down, she knew Dr. Johnson had a point. If Marcus had been a white teenager wearing the same hoodie and behaving identically, would she have flagged him as suspicious? Probably not. The realization made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She wasn't a racist person, or at least she didn't think she was, but her actions suggested otherwise. Before Sarah could gather her thoughts, Dr. Johnson continued, her voice steady but laced with disappointment. "You see, Ms. Sarah, profiling someone based on their appearance isn't just unfair, it's dangerous. It perpetuates stereotypes and creates unnecessary fear. My son is a bright, talented young man who happens to enjoy sketching in his notebook during flights. That's all he was doing today, sketching, not plotting anything sinister, not causing harm to anyone. Yet here we are because someone decided to assume the worst." Her words hung heavy in the air, cutting through the tension like a knife. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. Though she fought to keep them at bay, she wanted to defend herself, to explain that she had only been trying to do her job, but she couldn't deny the truth in Dr. Johnson's statement. Her judgment had been clouded by assumptions, and now an innocent boy and his family was paying the price. Marcus finally spoke up, breaking the silence. "Mom, it's okay," he said softly, placing a hand on her arm. "I'm fine. Let's just go home." Dr. Johnson glanced at her son, her expression softening slightly. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder before turning back to the officers. "This ends now," she declared firmly. "There is no evidence against my son and therefore no reason to detain him further. We're leaving." The officers exchanged glances, clearly aware they were outmatched. One of them nodded reluctantly. "Very well, ma'am, you're free to go." With that, Dr. Johnson gathered Marcus's belongings and ushered him toward the door. Sarah stood frozen in place, unsure of what to say or do. As Dr. Johnson passed by her, she paused briefly, fixing Sarah with one last penetrating look. "Consider this a learning experience, Miss Sarah," she said quietly. "We all make mistakes, but it's how we grow from them that matters." And with that, she walked away, leaving Sarah alone in the room with her guilt and shame. Reflections after the storm. Once outside the terminal, Marcus breathed a sigh of relief. The confrontation with law enforcement had shaken him more than he cared to admit. Though his mom's presence had comforted him, the sting of being singled out remained. "Why does this always happen to me?" he muttered under his breath as they headed toward the parking lot. Dr. Johnson heard him and slowed her pace, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I know it's frustrating, sweetheart," she said, her tone softening. "But remember, you're stronger than this. People will judge you unfairly sometimes, but that doesn't define who you are. What defines you is how you rise above it." Marcus nodded, though he still looked troubled. "It's not fair, Mom. I wasn't doing anything wrong. Why can't people just see me for who I am?" Dr. Johnson sighed, wishing she had an easy answer for him. "Because the world isn't fair, Marcus. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting for change. Every time someone tries to bring you down, prove them wrong. Use your voice, your talents, and your resilience to show the world what you're capable of." Her words resonated with Marcus, giving him a small measure of strength. Still, he couldn't help but wonder how many more times he'd face similar situations. Would people ever stop seeing him as a stereotype instead of an individual? Back inside the terminal, Sarah sat alone in the staff lounge, replaying the events of the day in her mind. She couldn't shake the image of Dr. Johnson's disapproving gaze or the hurt in Marcus's eyes. For years she had prided herself on being a fair and compassionate person, yet today she had failed miserably. How could she have let her biases get the better of her? Determined to make things right, Sarah decided to take action. She reached out to her supervisor and requested additional training on cultural sensitivity and unconscious bias. She also began researching ways to educate herself and others about racial profiling and its impact. Though it wouldn't undo the harm she had caused, she hoped it would prevent similar incidents in the future. As the sun set over Los Angeles, the airport bustled with activity once again. Life moved forward, but the lessons learned that day lingered in the hearts and minds of those involved. For Sarah, it was a wake-up call, a reminder to challenge her assumptions and treat everyone with fairness and respect. For Marcus, it was another chapter in his ongoing journey to navigate a world that often judged him unfairly. And for Dr. Johnson, it was a chance to stand up for justice, not just for her son, but for all those who faced discrimination daily. Though the incident had been painful, it carried within it the seeds of growth and understanding. Only time would tell how each person would carry those lessons into the future. The days following the incident at the airport were a whirlwind of emotions for everyone involved. For Marcus, the teenage boy who had been unfairly detained, life felt like it was moving in slow motion. Though he was safe and back home with his family, the sting of being profiled lingered. It wasn't just the humiliation of being questioned by police officers. It was the reminder that no matter how hard he tried to live a normal life, there would always be people ready to judge him based on his race. He couldn't help but replay the events of that day over and over in his mind. Why had the flight attendant singled him out? Had she really thought he posed a threat, or had her assumptions about him been automatic? Marcus's frustration grew as he reflected on similar experiences from his past. There was the time a store clerk followed him around the shop, assuming he might steal something, or when a teacher doubted his academic abilities because of his background. These moments added up, chipping away at his confidence and making him question whether he'd ever truly be seen for who he was. But this latest incident hit differently. It happened in public, in front of strangers, and now he knew exactly what others thought of him when they looked at him. His mom, Dr. Evelyn Johnson, noticed the toll it was taking on him. She could see the anger simmering beneath the surface, the way he withdrew into himself after school instead of laughing with friends like he used to. As much as she wanted to shield him from the harsh realities of the world, she knew she couldn't. What she could do, however, was remind him of his worth and teach him how to channel his pain into something positive. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Dr. Johnson decided it was time for a heart-to-heart conversation. "Marcus," she began gently, setting aside the documents she'd been reviewing for work, "I know what happened at the airport hurt you, and I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Marcus shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "It's not your fault, Mom. But why does it keep happening? No matter where I go, people always assume the worst about me." Dr. Johnson sighed, leaning forward to look him directly in the eyes. Because the world isn't perfect, sweetheart. Some people are quick to judge without knowing the full story. But here's the thing. You can't let their ignorance define you. You're smart, talented, and kind. Those qualities are far more important than anyone else's opinion of you. But it's not fair, Marcus protested, his voice rising slightly. Why should I have to prove myself every single time? You shouldn't, Dr. Johnson admitted. And that's why we fight, not with anger, but with action. Instead of letting these moments break you, use them to inspire change. Share your story. Educate others. Show the world that stereotypes don't define us. Her words struck a chord with Marcus. For the first time since the incident, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he couldn't control how others saw him, but he could control how he responded. That realization sparked an idea, one that would grow into something meaningful in the weeks to come. Meanwhile, Sarah wrestled with her own feelings of guilt and regret. Since the confrontation with Dr. Johnson, she hadn't been able to shake the image of Marcus's frightened face or the disappointment in his mother's eyes. Every time she boarded a plane, served drinks, or greeted passengers, memories of that day came rushing back. She couldn't stop thinking about how easily she had let her biases dictate her actions, and how those actions had affected an innocent teenager. At first, Sarah tried to justify her behavior to herself. After all, she had only been doing her job, hadn't she? Ensuring passenger safety was her top priority, and reporting suspicious activity was standard protocol. But the more she reflected on it, the clearer it became that her decision hadn't been based solely on professional duty. Deep down, she had allowed preconceived notions about Marcus's appearance and behavior to influence her judgment. The fact that he was black had played a role, whether she wanted to admit it or not. Realizing this truth was painful, but Sarah knew she couldn't ignore it. If she wanted to grow as a person, she needed to confront her biases head-on. Determined to make amends, she took several steps to educate herself and prevent similar mistakes in the future. First, she signed up for workshops on cultural sensitivity and unconscious bias, eager to understand how subtle prejudices could shape someone's worldview. She also reached out to diversity trainers within her airline company, advocating for mandatory training sessions for all employees. To her surprise, many of her colleagues supported her efforts. Some even shared their own stories of profiling passengers or being profiled themselves. One coworker confessed that she once flagged a Middle Eastern man simply because he prayed quietly during the flight. Another admitted to feeling uncomfortable around certain accents despite knowing intellectually that it was irrational. Hearing these confessions made Sarah realize she wasn't alone in struggling with bias, but that didn't excuse her behavior. It only reinforced the importance of addressing these issues openly and honestly. As part of her journey toward self-improvement, Sarah began reading books and watching documentaries about systemic racism and discrimination. She learned about the history of racial profiling in America and its lasting impact on marginalized communities. The more she read, the angrier she became, not at others, but at herself for failing to recognize these patterns sooner. How many times had she unknowingly contributed to someone's suffering? The thought haunted her, but it also motivated her to do better. Back at school, Marcus started putting his mom's advice into practice. With her encouragement, he joined a local youth group focused on social justice and activism. At first, he was hesitant to share his story, worried that people might pity him or dismiss his experiences. But as he opened up during meetings, he realized how powerful storytelling could be. Other members of the group listened intently, nodding along as he described the fear and frustration he felt at the airport. Many of them had faced similar challenges, and hearing their stories gave him strength. Inspired by the support he received, Marcus decided to take his message beyond the group. He began speaking at schools and community events, sharing his experience of being racially profiled and urging others to challenge their assumptions. His talks weren't accusatory or angry. They were heartfelt and hopeful, emphasizing the need for understanding and empathy. "We're all human beings," he often said during his presentations. "If we take the time to see each other as Individuals instead of labels. We can create a world where no one has to feel judged for being who they are. His courage didn't go unnoticed. Teachers praised him for his maturity and resilience, while classmates admired his willingness to speak out. Even strangers approached him after his speeches to thank him for opening their eyes to the reality of racial bias. Though Marcus still carried the weight of his experiences, he found purpose in using them to spark change. For Dr. Johnson, the incident served as a stark reminder of the work that still needed to be done. As the FBI chief, she was no stranger to fighting injustice, but seeing her son caught in the crossfire of prejudice brought the issue closer to home. Determined to turn the situation into an opportunity, she used her platform to advocate for reforms within law enforcement and aviation industries. During interviews and public appearances, she spoke candidly about the dangers of racial profiling and the importance of accountability. "We must hold ourselves to higher standards," she declared during a televised panel discussion. "Whether you're a flight attendant, a police officer, or a CEO, your actions have consequences. When we allow biases to guide our decisions, we perpetuate harm, not just to individuals, but to society as a whole." Her words resonated deeply, sparking conversations across the country. Airlines began reevaluating their protocols for handling suspicious behavior, incorporating implicit bias training into employee programs. Law enforcement agencies reviewed their procedures for detaining passengers, ensuring that accusations were backed by concrete evidence rather than assumptions. While progress was slow, it was undeniable. Though the incident at the airport had caused pain and discomfort for everyone involved, it ultimately became a catalyst for growth. Sarah learned humility and empathy, vowing to treat all passengers with fairness and respect. Marcus discovered his voice, using his story to inspire change and build bridges between communities. And Dr. Johnson continued leading the charge for equality, reminding everyone of the power of understanding and compassion. Life moved forward, but the lessons of that day remained etched in their hearts, a reminder that even in moments of conflict, there is always an opportunity to learn, grow, and make the world a little brighter. Weeks turned into months, and life slowly returned to its usual rhythm for everyone touched by the incident at the airport. But while the initial shock had faded, the impact of that day continued to ripple outward, shaping each person's journey in profound ways. For Sarah, Marcus, and Dr. Evelyn Johnson, the lessons learned became stepping stones toward personal growth and collective change. For Sarah, the aftermath of the incident was a period of intense self-reflection. Every morning as she got ready for work, she reminded herself of the promise she had made: to be better, to do better. The workshops on cultural sensitivity and unconscious bias had opened her eyes to the subtle yet pervasive ways prejudice could creep into everyday decisions. She realized now that her assumptions about Marcus hadn't been isolated. They were part of a larger pattern she needed to break. At first, implementing these new insights wasn't easy. Old habits die hard, and there were moments when Sarah caught herself making snap judgments about passengers, judgments rooted in stereotypes rather than facts. But instead of brushing them off, she forced herself to pause and reconsider. Why did she feel uneasy about someone? Was it based on their behavior, or was it influenced by preconceived notions? These small acts of mindfulness helped her grow, more aware of her biases, and gradually shift her perspective. Sarah also took proactive steps to educate her colleagues. During team meetings, she shared what she had learned from the workshops, encouraging others to reflect on their own behaviors. At first, some dismissed her efforts as unnecessary. "We're professionals," one coworker argued. "We don't need training on how to treat people fairly." But Sarah persisted, gently challenging their assumptions and sharing examples of how even well-meaning individuals could fall prey to bias. Over time, her persistence paid off. More of her coworkers began attending diversity training sessions, and discussions about inclusivity became a regular part of their workplace culture. Outside of work, Sarah found solace in journaling. Writing allowed her to process her emotions and track her progress. On particularly tough days when doubts crept in, she revisited her entries to remind herself how far she'd come. One evening, she wrote, "Today I saw a young man on the East York plain who reminded me of Marcus. He wore a hoodie and sat quietly, sketching in a notebook. For a moment, my old instincts kicked in, but then I remembered. I smiled at him instead, and he smiled back. It felt like a victory. That simple act, a smile exchanged between two strangers, was a testament to how much Sarah had changed. She no longer saw passengers through the lens of suspicion, but as individuals with their own stories, dreams, and struggles. Her renewed sense of empathy not only made her a better flight attendant, but also enriched her interactions with everyone she encountered. Marcus, too, embraced the changes sparked by that fateful day. His decision to speak out about his experience had transformed him from a quiet teenager into a confident advocate for justice. At school, he became known as the boy who stood up against racial profiling, inspiring his peers to think critically about the world around them. Teachers often praised him for his maturity and leadership, inviting him to lead discussions on topics like equality and inclusion. But activism wasn't without its challenges. Some students teased him, calling him too serious or accusing him of seeking attention. Others questioned whether his speeches actually made a difference. There were days when Marcus doubted himself, wondering if his efforts were futile in the face of such deeply entrenched issues. Yet every time he considered giving up, he thought of his mom's words. Change starts with one voice. Yours matters. 2. Keep himself motivated. Marcus kept a journal where he documented both his successes and setbacks. He noted the number of people who attended his talks, the emails he received from strangers thanking him for sharing his story, and the policies implemented by local organizations inspired by his advocacy. These small victories fueled his determination to keep going. One of his proudest accomplishments came when his school district agreed to host an annual Diversity Day, featuring workshops, panel discussions, knowledge edgement ceremonies celebrating students who promoted inclusivity. Marcus played a key role in organizing the event, working alongside teachers and community leaders to ensure it addressed real-world issues. When the first Diversity Day finally arrived, hundreds of students and parents gathered to participate. Watching the crowd engage in meaningful conversations filled Marcus with pride. For once, he felt like he was truly making a difference. Still, Marcus knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. Racial profiling wasn't something that could be eradicated overnight. It required constant vigilance and effort, but he refused to let cynicism win. Each time he faced adversity, he reminded himself of the bigger picture, a future where no one would have to endure what he went through. As for Dr. Evelyn Johnson, the incident reinforced her commitment to fighting systemic injustice. While she had always been passionate about equality, seeing her son subjected to racial profiling reignited her drive to create lasting change. Using her position as FBI chief, she spearheaded initiatives aimed at addressing bias within law enforcement and aviation industries. One of her most significant achievements was the launch of a nationwide program called Bridging Perspectives. Designed to foster dialogue between law enforcement officers, airline staff, and members of marginalized communities, the program provided training on recognizing and combating implicit bias. Participants engaged in interactive workshops, role-playing, scenarios, and open discussions facilitated by experts in social justice. The goal was simple: to humanize those on both sides of the equation and build mutual understanding. Dr. Johnson also advocated for policy reforms at the federal level. She worked closely with lawmakers to draft legislation requiring airlines to adopt stricter guidelines for reporting suspicious behavior. Under the new rules, reports had to be backed by concrete evidence, not vague suspicions, and employees who flagged passengers without justification faced consequences. Though the process was lengthy and fraught with resistance, Dr. Johnson remained steadfast, knowing that progress often required patience and perseverance. Beyond her professional endeavors, Dr. Johnson prioritized spending quality time with Marcus. Despite her demanding schedule, she made sure to carve out moments for family dinners, weekend outings, and heartfelt conversations. She understood that her son needed reassurance, not just that he was loved, but that his experiences mattered. Together, they celebrated his victories, navigated his challenges, and dreamed of a brighter future. The incident at the airport had left an indelible mark on everyone involved, but it ultimately served as a catalyst for transformation. Sarah emerged from the ordeal with a deeper understanding of empathy and fairness, determined to treat all passengers with dignity and respect. Marcus channeled his frustration into activism, using his voice to inspire change and uplift others. And Dr. Johnson leveraged her authority to push for systemic reforms, ensuring that incidents like the one involving her son became less frequent over time. Though none of them could erase the pain of that day, they chose to focus on the silver linings, the growth, the connections, and the hope for a better tomorrow. Life moved forward as it always does, but the memory of that fateful flight stayed with them as a poignant reminder of the power of resilience and the importance of standing up for what is right. In the end, the story wasn't just about a misunderstanding on a plane. It was about humanity, the flaws we carry, the lessons we learn, and the bridges we build to overcome our differences. And though the journey was far from over, each step brought them closer to a world where everyone could be seen for who they truly are.